It is Saturday, August 16th. I'm Yumna Naufal. These are today's headlines. The Salam attempts to appease the relatives of the soldiers abducted by Islamist fighters during the Adsail clashes. Lebanon's Education Minister Abu Saab decides to issue passing certificates to thousands of students who took official exams after efforts failed to convince teachers to end their boycott. And Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah dubs the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant an existential threat, meaning Lebanon, calls on the nation to put differences aside. Prime Minister Tamam Salam considers that the clashes in the northeastern town of Adsail threaten the whole nation as it comes amid a delicate situation in the country. The Premier stressed that the state will not neglect the fate of its nationals nor give up on them. He said that there were fears that the situation in Adsail would escalate due to the large number of Syrians living there. Adsail, whose residents have been broadly supportive of the rebellion against Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, is currently playing host to 47,000 Syrian refugees. He called on the relatives of the kidnapped soldiers and policemen to be patient and become wary of attempts to exploit their tragedy. Reports say that the fighters, some of them belonging to the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, and others to al-Nusra Front, took hostage more than 35 captives. Lebanon's Education Minister Ilyas Bousaab decided to issue passing certificates to thousands of students who took official exams after efforts failed to convince teachers to back down on their boycott of correcting the tests. He said, "I decided to give those who took the exams and the certificate that would allow their entry into colleges." He told these two reporters at a news conference, saying such a move was his last resort to safeguard the school year. Lebanon has not had to resort to issuing passing certificates in lieu of grading the exam since the end of the Civil War in 1990. The identification cards students use to enter exam rooms and take the test will be used as an affidavit as proof of completion, he said, adding that an additional official certificate would be issued at a later stage. To the students, he said, "You have now passed your exams, congratulations, but I hoped the exams would be corrected. Your teachers and the unions could not help you in correcting them." MP Walid Jumblat is calling for the election of a compromise candidate for the presidential post, saying the purpose behind ISIS was to destroy Islam and rid the region of its minority group, while insisting that MP Henri Hello, a member of Jumblat's parliamentary bloc, was his preferred candidate. Jumblat stressed on the need to search for a compromise candidate for the presidency. Touting Hello as a consensus figure, Jumblat said that the lawmaker was open to all Lebanese parties and sects. In his interview, Jumblat also spoke about the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, saying the extremist group targeted not only Lebanon and Iraq, but Kurdistan and Syria as well. The head of the Progressive Socialist Party also commented on the recent clashes in the Adsail between the Lebanese army and militants from Syria, saying the military was able to successfully confront the gunmen. Hezbollah leader Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah dubbed the Islamic State of Iraq and Greater Syria an existential threat menacing Lebanon and the whole region, but highlighted that the resistance party will be capable of thwarting new conspiracies devised for the country and the region. The Lebanese need to be aware of this existential threat, he said, and the need to confront it. This was during his televised speech to mark the end of the 2006 War with Israel anniversary. Nasrallah said ISIS now sold oil and received funding from regional groups. He also said fighting the terrorist threat did not require national consensus. Logic, our religion, ethics, and experience have taught us that if a society is facing a threat, the priority becomes to counter that threat, and whoever fails to do so exposes their people to danger. He said supporting the Lebanese army and supplying it with weapons was a primary and primordial requirement toward countering the looming challenges. The U.S. Department of State issued a travel warning, another one, an advisory to Lebanon over ongoing safety and security concerns following the latest travel warning issued in January. U.S. citizens living and working in Lebanon should understand that they accept risks in remaining and should carefully consider those risks, according to a statement by the Department of State. U.S. citizens were urged not to travel to Lebanon due to potential death or injury. The statement also pointed out that there is a real possibility of wrong place, wrong time, harm to U.S. citizens. Attacks now regularly involve suicide bombers that can occur without warning. Lebanese security forces had also reportedly disrupted other planned bombings. It warned that sudden outbreaks of violence and kidnappings can occur at any time, adding that the ability of U.S. staff to reach travelers or provide emergency services is severely limited in several cases. Israeli and Palestinian negotiators are poised to resume indirect talks with Egyptian mediators on reaching a more permanent ceasefire before a current truce expires at midnight on Monday. The Egyptian government persuaded both sides late on Wednesday to adhere to a new 5-day ceasefire, extending an earlier 3-day agreement in order to allow more time to thrash out a longer-term truce. It got off to a rocky start with Palestinian rocket attacks and retaliatory Israeli airstrikes, but Saturday marked a 6th day of quiet following more than a month of fighting that has killed more than 1,900 Palestinians and 67 Israelis. The European Union welcomed the ceasefire in Gaza and said it was ready to expand a police mission in Rafah on the border with Egypt and train Palestinian Authority customs personnel and police for redeployment in Gaza. Jihadists carried out what is being labeled as a massacre in the northern Iraq village of Kosho, killing dozens of people, most of them members of the Yazidi religious minority. Officials are saying that they committed this massacre against the people. Senior Iraqi official Hushar Zebadi was quoted as citing sources from the region and intelligence information. Around 80 of them had been killed, he added. A Kurdish official in Iraq's Dohuk province gave a similar death toll, while a witness said he saw a large number of bodies in the village. Meanwhile, U.S. aircraft have launched airstrikes near Iraq's largest dam, killing up to 15 fighters from the Islamic State group. In one of the most dramatic chapters of the conflict, the fighters stormed the Sinjar area of northwestern Iraq earlier this month, prompting tens of thousands of people, many of them Yazidis, to flee. Kurdish fighters on the ground and U.S. airstrikes eventually helped most of those trapped to escape after more than 10 days under siege, but some do remain in the mountains. Coming up next, Pope Francis beatifies 124 Christian martyrs in the South Korean capital. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching the 4:20 o'clock news. Syrian government forces seized a key town on the outskirts of Damascus after a months-long battle against rebels, according to a military source and state television. The army, with the cooperation of the National Defense Forces militia, has accomplished its mission of restoring stability and security to Mleiha, the army command said in a statement. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, the UK-based group, backed up the report. The army said Mleiha would now serve as a springboard for its bid to regain control of eastern Ghouta, an important rebel bastion outside Damascus that has long been in the sights of government forces. Mleiha lies southeast of the capital and has been a key flashpoint in fighting around Damascus. And responding to the growing threat from militant groups in Iraq and Syria, the United Nations Security Council imposed sanctions on 6 men for recruiting or financing foreign fighters and threatened additional sanctions against those supporting the groups. The resolution notes that oil fields controlled by the Islamic State group, Jabhat al-Nusra, and other al-Qaeda-linked groups are generating income that is supporting their recruitment efforts and ability to carry out their operations. Speaking after the resolution was approved by the Council, British Ambassador to the UN, Mark Lyle Grant, said the resolution takes significant steps toward cutting off that funding.
This resolution does 4 things. It sends a strong and clear political message to the terrorists and those who support them. Secondly, it focuses on important practical measures, choking off recruitment and in particular the supply of foreign fighters. And thirdly, it tackles the funding and financing of these terrorist groups. And lastly, it applies sanctions to 6 individual terrorists and their key financial backers. There's been some talk in the press that ISIL is now self-funding in some way. That is not true. Yes, they may have control of the oil fields, they've still got to sell the oil. Yes, they have plundered the banks and they may have some short-term resources at their disposal, but they cannot survive independent of the outside world. It's been very clear that there should be no sale, export of any assets that could support ISIL or ANF or Al-Qaeda. That is very clear in this resolution, and Member States have a binding obligation under Chapter 7 to prevent that happening.
If Russia and Ukraine slide into an outright war, the United States and its allies will face tough choices on how to support a friendly state they have no intention of making a full NATO member. In what appeared to be a dramatic escalation, Ukraine said it had destroyed much of a column of armored vehicles that had entered its territory from Russia. Moscow dismissed the account as fantasy. NATO confirmed what it described as an incursion, but Ukraine did not specify if the vehicles were manned by Russian troops or separatist rebels, and it was not immediately clear if Russia would respond. If Moscow ever took any such action against a NATO member, that would inevitably trigger the alliance's Chapter 5 Mutual Defense Clause, essentially committing it to war. Ukraine, however, is not a member, and Western officials say is unlikely to become one anytime soon. The leaders of two Pakistani protest movements have vowed to keep their protests alive until Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif resigns, after thousands enter the country's capital in the biggest challenge yet to the 15-month-old civilian government. I will not leave here until I have gotten real freedom for the country, former cricket star Imran Khan, who heads the opposition Pakistani Tehreek al-Insaf party, told thousands of supporters who had followed him into Islamabad on Friday. Anti-government cleric Tahir al-Qadri has spearheaded a separate protest march from Lahore to the capital, planned to stage a sit-in with his followers and deliver a speech today. On Friday, a stone-throwing mob attacked Khan's convoy as he led supporters through the eastern city of Khujandwala. Gunshots were fired, but Khan was not injured. This is according to what his spokesman said. The unarmed black teenager whose shooting death in the United States by a white police officer unleashed riots in a Missouri town was a suspect in a robbery just minutes before he was killed, according to police. The allegation reignited fresh anger and frustration in the St. Louis suburb of Ferguson, with the 18-year-old student's family accusing police of attempting to demean his character amid an ongoing investigation. What, if anything, the robbery allegation had to do with the fatal encounter was unclear. Hours after the report's release, police said the officer, Darren Wilson, 28 years old, had no idea Michael Brown was a robbery suspect when he shot him. He simply wanted Brown to move from the road to the sidewalk, Ferguson Police Chief Tom Jackson said. Brown's death stirred racial tensions in the majority black suburb, with an overwhelmingly white police force, and renewed a national debate about relations between law enforcement and African Americans. Pope Francis has beatified 124 Christian martyrs in the South Korean capital and challenged Christians on the values they may be willing to die for in an increasingly materialistic and globalized world. The Pope performed the beatification on Saturday at a mass in front of hundreds of thousands of Catholics in Gwanghwamun Plaza, Seoul's main ceremonial thoroughfare. The Koreans were killed in the 18th and 19th centuries for refusing to renounce Christianity. Francis said their courage, charity, and their rejection of the rigid social structures of their day were an inspiration for people today. The most prominent among those beatified was an 18th century nobleman, Pol Yunji-chung, who became Korea's first Catholic martyr when he was executed in 1791 after clashing with Confucian officials. According to the church, around 10,000 Koreans were martyred in the first 100 years after Catholicism was introduced into the peninsula in 1784. This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a reminder of our top stories. MP Salam attempts to appease the relatives of the soldiers abducted by Islamist fighters during the Arsal clashes. Lebanon's education minister decides to issue passing certificates to thousands of students who have taken their exams after efforts failed to convince teachers to end their boycott. And Hezbollah leader Nasrallah dubbed the Islamic State of Iraq and Greater Syria an existential threat and calls on all of Lebanon to put its differences aside to counter it. Those are your Saturday headlines live on Future Television. I'm Yumna Naufal, wishing you a good weekend ahead. Take care.